close your eyes and let the modern world, with its frantic hum and digital glare, simply dissolve into the gray, salt-heavy mist of the South China Sea. It is the year 1839, but for us, time has slowed down, stretching out like the long, lazy shadows of a Canton afternoon. You are standing on the deck of a merchant ship, perhaps a teak-old East Indiaman, and as you lean against the railing, the wood feels warm and slightly rough under your palms, weathered by months of Atlantic gales and Indian Ocean heat. Ahead of you, the Pearl River opens its wide, muddy mouth, a gateway to an empire that believes itself to be the very center of the universe. The water here is a swirling mosaic of ochre and jade, crowded with thousands of vessels, small, nimble sampans darting like water beetles, and massive, high-pooped war junks with their great bat-wing sails of matted bamboo, creaking rhythmically in the humid breeze. Can you smell it? It is a scent that doesn't exist anymore. A thick, intoxicating layer of wood smoke, dried fish, jasmine tea, and the sweet, heavy undertone of human industry. And somewhere, beneath it all, the sharp, metallic tang of silver. You see, in this era, China is a locked room, and the British are leaning against the door with all their weight, desperate for a glimpse of the treasures inside. The emperor, sitting upon his dragon throne in the distant, frigid north of Beijing, views the rest of the world as nothing more than a collection of unruly children, expected to bring tribute and kowtow in the dust. But the British are merchants of a new age, a cold, calculated age of balance sheets and global dominance. They have developed a taste for Chinese tea that has become a national obsession, a physiological necessity that spans from the poorest London chimney sweep to the Queen herself. But there's a problem, a nagging, persistent itch in the British treasury. The Chinese do not want anything the West has to offer. They do not want British wool, for their silk is finer. They do not want British gadgets, for they find them amusing but unnecessary. They want only one thing in exchange for their tea. They want silver, and so the silver flows out of London, out of Calcutta, and into the deep, insatiable pockets of the Qing Dynasty. The British economy is bleeding white, and the merchants of the East India Company are growing desperate. They need a commodity, something portable, something addictive, something that will reverse the flow of wealth, and they find it in the poppy fields of Bengal. Imagine those fields now, stretching out under a relentless Indian sun, a sea of white and purple petals swaying in the heat. This is the source of the black gold, the opium that will soon become the most valuable and the most destructive trade good in human history. It is harvested by hand, the sap scraped from the green seed pods, dried, and pressed into dark, sticky bowls the size of a cannonball. These bowls are packed into chests of mango wood, lined with dried leaves, and shipped across the turquoise waters to the coast of China. You watch as the chests are unloaded, not in the bright light of the official ports, but in the moonlit coves of Linton Island. The British ships, known as receiving ships, sit at anchor like ghosts, the mast stripped of sails, serving as floating warehouses for the illicit cargo. Small, fast Chinese boats, nicknamed fast crabs or scrambling dragons, pull alongside in the dead of night, their oars muffled with rags. The exchange is quick, silent, and efficient. The dark bowls of opium go one way. The heavy, clinking bags of silver go the other. And just like that, the tide begins to turn. The silver starts to flow back into British hands, and the bitter seed begins to take root in the soil of China. As we drift further into the Pearl River, the landscape changes. The hills are vibrant, shocking green, draped in low-hanging clouds that seem to weep with the humidity. You see small villages perched on the water's edge, where the rhythms of life have remained unchanged for 1,000 years, children playing in the mud, old men mending nets, the distant sound of a temple bell vibrating through the thick air. But there's a tension here now, a subtle, vibrating chord of anxiety. In the tea houses of Canton, the talk is no longer just about the harvest or the weather. It is about the foreign devils and their foreign mud. You hear the whispers in the narrow, winding alleys behind the factories, the sound of a long, slow inhalation, followed by the clink of a pipe. The smoke is different from tobacco. It is thinner, bluer, with a cloyingly sweet aroma that clings to the walls and the clothes of the men who seek its embrace. You walk through the 13 factories, the small strip of land to which all foreigners are confined. It is a claustrophobic, bustling world of its own, a tiny island of Europe on the edge of a vast, mysterious continent. The buildings are grand in their own way, with high ceilings and wide verandas, but they are also cages. The foreign traders are forbidden from entering the city of Canton itself, forbidden from bringing their wives, forbidden even from learning the Chinese language. They are tolerated only as long as they bring profit, and even then, they are treated with a polite, simmering contempt. You see them on the verandas, these British, American, and Parsi merchants, dressed in their heavy wool coats and high collars, sweating profusely in the tropical heat. They pace like caged lions, looking out at the river, waiting for the next ship, the next cargo, the next opportunity. Among them is a man whose name will become synonymous with the coming storm, William Jardine, a former ship surgeon. He is a man of granite will and sharp, predatory intelligence. He is known as the Iron-Headed Old Rat by the locals, a nickname he earned after being struck on the head by a club during a riot and barely flinching. Jardine doesn't see the misery the opium causes. He sees only the logic of the market. To him, it is a matter of liberty, the right of a man to buy and sell whatever he chooses. He believes that the Chinese emperor's ban on opium is an affront to the natural laws of trade, and he has friends in high places back in London, men who listen to his stories of Chinese arrogance and the vast, untapped wealth that lies just beyond the closed gates. But the emperor is no longer ignoring the rut. In the spring of 1839, he appoints a man of legendary integrity to solve the opium problem once and for all. Lin Zexu. Imagine a man of middle age, with a high forehead and eyes that seem to see through the excuses of lesser men. He is a scholar official, a man who believes in the moral order of the universe. When he arrives in Canton, he doesn't go to the banquets or the ceremonies. He begins to investigate. He sees the emaciated figures in the dens, the broken families, the corruption of the local officials who have been taking bribes to look the other way. His heart hardens. He writes a letter to Queen Victoria, a letter that is both a plea and a warning. He asks her, "Suppose there were people from another country who carried opium to England and deluded your people into buying and smoking it. Certainly your honorable country would also find it distasteful and be roused to indignation." You can almost feel the silence that follows that letter. It travels across the oceans, through the storms of the Cape, and arrives in a London that is too busy with its own industrial fires to care about the moral qualms of a pagan official. The Queen likely never sees it. The British government, led by the pragmatic and often cynical Lord Palmerston, is more interested in the revenue the trade generates. They see the Chinese demands not as a moral crusade, but as an insult to the British flag. And so, the stage is set. The clouds over the Pearl River grow darker, and the air feels heavy, as it does just before a summer storm breaks. Lin Zexu does not wait for an answer. He acts with a terrifying, focused energy. He demands that the foreign merchants hand over every single chest of opium in their possession. He surrounds the 13 factories with troops, cutting off their food and water, effectively holding the entire foreign community hostage. You can feel the panic in the factories, the heat, the thirst, the whispered arguments between those who want to resist and those who want to surrender. For weeks, the merchants are trapped, watching as the Chinese soldiers build high wooden fences around their homes. The world-weary historian in you knows that this is the point of no return. This is the moment where the bitter seed finally blooms into a flower of fire. Eventually, the British Superintendent of Trade, a man named Charles Elliot, arrives. He is a naval officer, a man of conscience who actually dislikes the opium trade, but he is caught between his duty to his countrymen and his respect for the law. He makes a fateful decision. He tells the merchants to hand over the opium to him, promising that the British government will compensate them for their losses. Over 20,000 chests of opium are surrendered. It is a staggering amount, a mountain of dak, sticky poison worth millions of pounds. Lin Zexu is triumphant. He takes the opium to a place called Human, by the sea. He digs 3 massive trenches, lines them with stone and timber, and fills them with water, salt, and lime. You can see the steam rising as the opium is thrown in, the chemical reaction breaking down the drug, turning it into a foul-smelling sludge that is washed out into the tide. Lin even offers a prayer to the god of the sea, apologizing for the pollution he is about to release into the waves, but insisting that it must be done to save his people. As the dark clouds of the lime reaction billow into the sky, the Chinese onlookers cheer. They believe they have won. They believe they have pushed the foreign devils back into the sea. But as you stand on the shore, watching the last of the sludge disappear into the gray water, you see a different sight on the horizon. Not the fast crabs of the smugglers, but the tall, elegant masts of the Royal Navy. The news of the theft of British property has reached London, and the drums of war are beginning to beat. The British are not coming for their opium. They are coming for their pride, and for the silver they believe is rightfully theirs. The air is still, the water is calm, but the peace is a lie. A tragedy is unfolding, one that will leave scars on the map of the world for centuries to come. You walk through the now empty factories, the dust settling on the fine mahogany furniture, the silence echoing in the halls. The trade has stopped, but the tension has only increased. The sailors on the British ships are restless, bored, and angry. There are brawls in the coastal villages. A Chinese man is killed in a drunken scuffle with British sailors in Kowloon. Lin Zexu demands the killers be handed over for Chinese justice. Elliot refuses, knowing that Chinese law involves a life for a life, regardless of intent. The stalemate hardens into a wall. The first shots are not fired by great admirals, but by Navis men in small boats. A skirmish in the bay. A few volleys of musket fire. The roar of a single cannon. It is enough. The fuse is being lit. You look up at the sky, and the stars seem cold and indifferent to the suffering below. The Qing Empire, with its ancient walls and its thousands of years of history, is about to face the cold, mechanical fury of the Industrial Revolution. The sleepy history of the East is about to be shattered by the waking violence of the West. And as the night deepens, you find yourself wondering, was it worth it? For a cup of tea, for a chest of silver, for the right to sell a dream of escape to a people who are already drowning? The water of the Pearl River flows on, dark and silent, carrying the secrets of the dead and the dreams of the living toward a future that no one in 1839 could possibly have imagined. You see, the British are not just bringing cannons. They are bringing a new way of seeing the world, a world where nothing is sacred if it cannot be sold, and where the strength of a nation is measured by the range of its guns and the speed of its engines. The Chinese, meanwhile, are trapped in a dream of the past, a dream where the emperor's virtue is enough to hold back the tide. But the tide is rising, cold and relentless, and it smells of salt and iron. As you sit by the riverbank, the sound of the water lapping against the stones is like the heartbeat of a dying era. You can see the lanterns of the Chinese war junks bobbing in the distance, their dragon-painted hulls looking fierce in the flickering light. But you know, with the sad clarity of a historian, that those dragons are made of wood and paper, and the fire that is coming is made of coal and steel. The merchants in the factories are already packing their trunks, not to leave for good, but to move to the rocky, barren island of Hong Kong, a place that is currently home to nothing but a few fishermen and a lot of seagulls. They see something there that the emperor does not, a deep-water harbor, a sheltered port, a place where the British flag can fly over a new kind of empire. The melancholy sets in now, as you realize that the beauty of this place, the mist on the mountains, the grace of the junks, the ancient dignity of the skull officials, is about to be torn apart, not because of a great villain or a grand plan, but because of a series of small, greedy choices made by men who couldn't see past their own ledges. It is a story of misunderstandings, of pride, and of a drug that made men forget who they were. But for tonight, the war is still just a series of whispers and a few distant sails. The air is cool, the jasmine is sweet, and the moon is a silver coin hanging over the mouth of the river. Sleep now, if you can, and listen to the water. For tomorrow, the sound of the waves will be replaced by the thunder of the guns, and the Pearl River will take a different color entirely. We stay here, in this moment of suspended animation, between the peace of the past and the violence of the future. The world is changing, tilting on its axis, and we are just passengers on a ship that is heading into the storm. The shadows are long, the night is deep, and the history of the world is being written in the smoke of 1,000 pipes and the wake of 1,000 ships. Can you hear the wind? It's picking up now, whistling through the rigging of the ships at anchor. It carries the smell of the open sea, of the long journey back to England, and the even longer journey that China is about to embark upon. A journey of 100 years of humiliation, of revolution, and of rebirth. But all of that is yet to come. For now, there's only the river, the mist, and the lingering scent of the bitter seed. As you walk back toward your cabin, the floorboards creaking under your feet, you look one last time at the city of Canton. It is a jewel of light in the darkness, a testament to a civilization that has outlasted Rome, outlasted the Persians, outlasted everyone. But it has never met the British, not like this. The tragedy of the Opium War isn't just in the battles or the treaties. It's in the loss of what could have been, a world where two great civilizations met as equals, rather than as predator and prey. But that world is a ghost, a might-have-been that dissolves like the opium smoke in the morning air. The historian's heart is a heavy one, for we know how the story ends even as we tell the beginning. We see the ships, we see the men, we see the tragedy, and we can do nothing but watch and remember and tell the tale to those who come after, so that perhaps, one day, the lessons of the Pearl River will finally be learned. But the night is long, and we have many hours yet to travel together. Let the rhythm of the waves soothe your mind. Let the darkness be a blanket. The first chapter is closing, the ink is drying, and the black gold is already doing its work. Rest now, listen to the creak of the hull and the distant, muffled calls of the sailors. The world of 1839 is slipping away, and when you wake, the sun will rise on a very different horizon, a horizon where the iron ships are waiting, and the era of the dragon is about to meet the age of steam. The silver is spent, the opium is destroyed, and the war has begun. But the story is only just beginning, and it is a story that will take us from the heights of the Forbidden City to the depths of the London docks, from the blood-stained decks of the Nemesis to the quiet, tragic end of a great official. So stay with me, in this slow, drifting dream of history. The mist is thick, but if you look closely, you can see the light of the first cannon flash, and then only the silence of the sea. The British are not just traitors anymore. They are invaders, and the Emperor is about to find out that his walls are not high enough, and his virtue is not strong enough, to stop the foreign mud from turning into a tide of iron. The clock is ticking, the tide is turning, and the world is waiting. But for you, there is only the peace of the narration, the warmth of the story, and the long, slow march of time. Part 1 is done, the foundation is laid, and the shadows are deep. We have seen the trade, we have seen the drug, and we have seen the man who tried to stop it. Now, we wait for the response. We wait for the empire to strike back. We wait for the nemesis to rise from the waves. Until then, let the silence of the historian guide you. Let the weight of the past be a comfort, not a burden. For in the telling of the tale, we'll find a kind of peace, a way to make sense of the chaos, and a way to honor the ghosts who still haunt the waters of the Pearl River. The jasmine is fading, the wood smoke is drifting away, and the night is yours. Sleep, and dream of silver and tea, of poppies and porcelain, For the morning will bring the roar of the British guns, and the peace will be gone forever. This is the beginning of the end of the old world, and the end of the beginning of the new. And you are here to see it all, from the safety of the shadows, in the company of a world-weary historian who has seen it all before, and will see it all again. The river flows on, the mist deepens, and the story continues. Sleep, sleep, and let the history wash over you like the tide. Part 2. The Iron Devil and the Shattered Gate. The morning of 1840 does not break with a golden sun, but with a pale, sickly light that struggles to penetrate the thick, sulphurous fog clinging to the coast of Guangdong. You are standing now on the high, rocky cliffs of Chusan, looking out over a sea that seems to be shivering. The air is colder here than it was in the humid crowdedness of Canton, and the wind has a sharp, biting edge that carries the scent of wet iron and coal smoke. Below you, the transition of an era is manifesting in physical form. You see the British fleet, a forest of masts moving with a terrifying, synchronized grace. These are not just merchant ships anymore. These are the instruments of a global superpower, the wooden walls of England. But among them, something new and monstrous is churning the water into a white, frothy rage. The Nemesis, that is the name the British have given to their secret weapon, to the Chinese defenders on the shore. She looks like a hallucination, a devil's ship made not of warm, living wood, but of cold, unyielding black iron. She has no great sails to catch the wind. Instead, thick, oily plumes of black smoke vomit from her funnel, staining the pristine sky and announcing the arrival of the Industrial Revolution to a continent that still measures time by the seasons and the tides. You can hear the rhythmic, mechanical thumping of her engines, a heartbeat of steel that drowns out the natural sounds of the waves and the gales. It is a sound that signals the end of the world as the Qing Dynasty knows it. Can you imagine the confusion in the minds of the Chinese soldiers standing behind the stone embankments of their forts? They have spent their lives training with bows, matchlock muskets, and heavy bronze cannons that are often older than their grandfathers. They believe in the strength of their walls and the righteousness of their cause. But as the Nemesis glides effortlessly into the shallow waters where no deep-draught ship should be able to go, the reality of their situation begins to sink in like a stone in a well. The iron ship doesn't care about the currents. It doesn't care about the wind. It simply moves, a predator made of fire and coal, its heavy guns swiveling toward the ancient fortifications with a cold, mechanical indifference. The historian in me wants to reach back through time, to tap the shoulder of the Chinese commander and tell him to run, to negotiate, to hide. But history is a river that only flows in one direction, and today, that river is running red. The first broadside from British ships is not a sound, but a physical shock that you feel in your very marrow. It is a roar that shatters the silence of the morning, followed by the terrifying whistle of solid iron balls tearing through the air. You watch as the stone walls of the fort, built to withstand the pirates of a previous century, simply disintegrate under the impact. Dust, splinters, and the screams of men rise into the air, mixing with the black smoke of the British engines. As you walk through the aftermath of the first skirmish, the sensory details are overwhelming. The smell of burnt gunpowder is everywhere, sharp, acrid, and suffocating. The ground is littered with the remnants of a lost world, broken porcelain, torn silk banners that once fluttered proudly in the breeze, and the heavy, discarded matchlocks of soldiers who realized too late that their weapons were useless against the range of the British rifles. There is a profound, echoing melancholy in the sight of a shattered war junk, its dragon-carved prow resting in the mud, half submerged, as the tide slowly washes over it. It looks like a Dead Sea creature, a relic of a time when the world was larger and more mysterious. The British soldiers and Marines begin to land, their red coats looking like splashes of fresh blood against the gray sand. They move with a professional, practiced efficiency. They are men from the slums of Manchester, the docks of London, and the highlands of Scotland, driven by a mixture of discipline, boredom, and the promise of prize money. They don't see the tragedy of what they are doing. They see a job to be done, a small war to be won for the glory of a queen they will never meet. You see them looting the abandoned temples, their heavy boots clattering on the polished floors where monks once meditated in silence. They marvel at the gold leaf, the intricate carvings, and the strange, exotic beauty of the land they are conquering, even as they smash it to pieces to see what might be hidden inside. Back in Beijing, the emperor, the Daoguang emperor, is receiving reports that are increasingly filtered through the fear and pride of his officials. He is told of skirmishes, of minor setbacks, of repelling the barbarians, even as his coastal defenses are being systematically erased. He sits in the heart of the Forbidden City, surrounded by thousands of years of tradition, convinced that the British are merely a temporary nuisance, like a swarm of particularly persistent mosquitoes. He orders his generals to exterminate the invaders, to sweep them back into the sea, not realizing that the sea is now the British home, and the coast is their playground. But you, the listener, can see the truth that the emperor cannot. You see the map of China being carved up, port by port. Ningbo, Ami, Shanghai, each city falling like a domino under the weight of the British naval power. The British aren't interested in occupying the land. They don't want to rule the millions of people who live here. They want something much more modern, and much more cold. They want free trade. They want the right to sell their opium, to buy their tea, and to have their merchants protected by British law on Chinese soil. It is an empire of commerce, built on the foundations of a drug habit and enforced by the most advanced technology on Earth. As the sun begins to set over the captured city of Ningbo, you find yourself sitting in a garden that was once a place of peace. The plum blossoms are in bloom, their delicate white petals falling like snow onto the blood-stained grass. The contrast is heartbreaking. The subtle wit of the historian notes that the British officers are now sitting in the mandarins' chairs, drinking the mandarins' tea, and complaining about the lack of good English beer. They write letters home to their wives in Sussex or Kent, describing the quaint customs of the Chinese and the splendid opportunities for trade, seemingly oblivious to the fact that they are the architects of a national catastrophe. You see a group of Chinese scholars, men who have spent their entire lives studying the classics of Confucius, standing in a corner of the square. They look lost, their worldview shattered as completely as the walls of their city. For them, the moral order has been inverted. The barbarians have won, not through superior virtue or wisdom, but through the crude application of iron and fire. It is a psychic wound that will fester for a century, a deep-seated realization that the Middle Kingdom is no longer the center of anything but its own tragedy. The nemesis sits out in the harbor, her black hull shimmering in the moonlight. She is a ghost of the future, a harbinger of a world that will be defined by machines and markets. The soft-spoken historian reminds you that this ship was built in a shipyard in Birkenhead, funded by private investors, and sent halfway around the world just to ensure that the flow of silver didn't stop. There is a cold, mathematical beauty to it. If you can forget the human cost. And what of the opium? It is still there, behind the lines, flowing into the veins of the country even as the cannons roar. The war isn't stopping the trade. It is protecting it. The British merchants follow the navy like vultures following a lion, setting up their shops in the ruins of the captured ports. They are selling the black gold to a population that is increasingly looking for any way to escape the grim reality of the war. It is a vicious, self-sustaining cycle. The drug funds the war, and the war expands the market for the drug. You walk down to the water's edge, where the dampness of the night air feels like a heavy shroud. The sounds of the British camp, the laughter, the songs, the clink of glasses, drift over the water, sounding jarringly out of place. You look at the dark shape of the Chinese mainland, a vast, sleeping giant that is being poked and prodded by a tiny, metallic needle. The scale of the mismatch is almost absurd. A small island nation on the other side of the planet is dismantling the oldest empire on Earth, and they are doing it for the sake of a balance sheet. The atmosphere is thick with a sense of the end of things. The old ways of war, of diplomacy, of life itself, are being incinerated in the boilers of the steamships. You can feel the moisture on your skin, the salt on your lips, and the deep, hollow ache of a history that is being written in real time. There is no mystery left here, only the cold, hard facts of ballistics and steam pressure. And yet, there is a lingering ghost of the old China in the way the moon reflects off the quiet pools of the garden, a reminder of a time when the world was governed by ritual and poetry. That world is dying, gasping for air as the black smoke of the nemesis fills the sky. The historian's voice grows softer, a May whisper in the dark. For what is there to say when the machines begin to speak? We see the British preparing for the next move, the push toward the Yangtze River, the heart of the empire. They know that if they can cut the Great Canal, the artery that feeds Beijing, the emperor will have no choice but to bow. It is a strategy of strangulation, a cold-blooded calculation that treats a nation like a patient on a surgical table. You watch as the coal is shoveled into the furnaces of the steamships, the red glow reflecting in the eyes of the stokers. They are the new gods of this era, the men who feed the fire that moves the world. And on the shore, the Chinese people watch the smoke, wondering what they have done to anger the heavens, not realizing that the heavens have nothing to do with it. It is only the greed of men and the power of iron. As we close this chapter of our journey, the image of the nemesis remains burned into your mind. A black silhouette against a bloody sunset, a ship that doesn't need the wind, a ship that doesn't have a soul. The gates of China have been shattered, and their iron devil is sailing through the ruins, carrying a cargo of opium, silver, and the cold, hard future. The night is long, and the river is deep, and the sound of the steam engine continues, a relentless, rhythmic thumping that will not stop until the emperor signs away his pride. Sleep now, under the shadow of the iron ship, and listen to the water lapping against the broken stones of the fort. The war is far from over, but the outcome was decided the moment the first lump of coal was tossed into the fire. The bitter seed has grown into a forest of masts, and the harvest is about to begin. A harvest of silver, of blood, and of broken dreams. The world-weary historian sighs, the sound lost in the wind, for there is so much more to tell, and the night is only just beginning. Part 3. The Great River's Silence and the Walls of Stone. The year is 1842, and the humid, heavy air of the Chinese summer has become a physical weight, a wet wool blanket that smothers the senses and slows the pulse. You are no longer on the open sea, but deep within the winding, arterial heart of the empire, the Yangtze River. The long river is a world unto itself, a yellow, silt-laden giant that has birthed dynasties and drowned rebellions. But today, the river is quiet, a silence that is both unnatural and terrifying. The usual cacophony of the river, the singing of boatmen, the rhythmic splashing of oars, the shouting of merchants at the water's edge, has been replaced by a low, vibrating hum that seems to come from the very water itself. It is the hum of the British fleet, a massive procession of over 70 vessels, moving upstream like a line of iron-toothed predators. You are standing on the deck of one of the trailing frigates, watching the banks slip by. The landscape is a masterpiece of green and gold, endless rice paddies, ancient pagodas reflecting in the still pools of the floodplains, and the distant, purple-blue mountains that seem to watch the invasion with an indifferent, ancient wisdom. But as you look closer, you see that the villages are empty. The white smoke rising from the chimneys is not from cooking fires, but from the smoldering remains of abandoned homes. The people have fled into the hills, leaving behind a silence that rings in your ears. The British goal is simple, surgical, and devastating. They are heading for the intersection of the Yangtze and the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal is the jugular vein of the Qing Dynasty, the ancient waterway that carries the tribute rice from the fertile south to the hungry, crowded streets of Beijing in the north. To cut this canal is to starve the capital, to blind the emperor, and to bring the entire machinery of the empire to a grinding, agonizing halt. The British strategists, sitting in their cramped cabins under flickering oil lamps, have realized that they do not need to march on Beijing. They only need to hold the river and wait for the hunger to do their work for them. As the sun climbs higher, the heat becomes oppressive, a shimmering haze that distorts the horizon. You see the Nemesis and her sister ships, the Phlegethon and the Pluto, lead the way. Their iron hulls are hot to the touch, and the men in the engine rooms are living in a literal hell, shoveling coal into the white-hot maws of the furnaces in temperatures that would kill a normal man. But the machines do not tire. They churn the yellow water into a muddy foam, their paddles striking the surface with a relentless mechanical rhythm. Thump-hiss, thump-hiss. It is the sound of the 19th century erasing the 14th. You watch as the fleet approaches the city of Zhenjing. This is not just another coastal fort. This is a stronghold of the Manchu bannermen, the elite warrior caste of the Qing Dynasty. These are men who trace their lineage back to the great conquerors who first took the dragon throne. They are not the terrified peasants or the corrupt officials the British have encountered elsewhere. They are men of iron, and they are prepared to die for a world that is already disappearing. The defense of Zhenjing is a symphony of tragic courage. As the British troops, the 49th and 55th regiments, begin their assault on the city walls, they expect the usual flight and surrender. Instead, they find themselves in a brutal, house-to-house struggle that lasts for hours under a punishing sun. You can hear the sharp, crackling reports of the British Baker rifles and the heavier, more guttural boom of the Chinese jingals, massive, two-man muskets that fire iron slugs the size of walnuts. The air is thick with the smell of scorched brick, spilled blood, and the sweet, cloying scent of the gardens that are being trampled into the mud. The historian in me notes the dark, dry irony of the situation. The British, who consider themselves the peak of civilization, are forced to engage in a kind of savagery they haven't seen in decades. They are fighting men who have no concept of Western surrender. Men who, when they see the walls are breached, turn their swords upon their own families and then themselves, rather than live to see the barbarian flag fly over their rooftops. As you walk through the captured streets of the inner city, the silence is no longer the silence of abandonment. It is the silence of the grave. You see the Manchu officers, dressed in their fine, padded armor, lying dead in their gardens, their wives and children beside them in a final, horrific act of loyalty to a dying code. It is a sight that haunts even the most hardened British soldiers. They came for silver and trade, and they found a massacre of souls. The melancholy in the air is palpable, a thick, gray fog that even the bright summer sun cannot dispel. You stand by a stone well, the water cool and deep, and you realize that the world being born today is one that has no room for the honor of the bannerman. It is a world of contracts, not of oaths. The British commanders, including the stern Sir Henry Pottinger, realized that the horror of Zhenjing has served its purpose. The news of the fall of the city and the cutting of the Grand Canal ripples through the empire like a shockwave. The price of grain in Beijing begins to skyrocket. The emperor's advisors, once so arrogant, are now whispering of appeasement and negotiation. The reality of the steamship has finally penetrated the thick walls of the Forbidden City. You find yourself back on the river as the fleet moves toward Nanjing. The southern capital is a city of legend, its massive walls stretching for miles, its porcelain tower once one of the wonders of the world. But as the British guns are trained on the city gates, the gates do not open for a sally. They open for parley. The era of fighting is over. The era of the pen has begun. Imagine the scene on the deck of the HMS Cornwallis, a massive 74-gun ship of the line. The British officers are in their full-dress uniforms, scarlet coats, gold lace, white breeches, standing stiffly on the quarterdeck. Opposite them are the Chinese commissioners, Qing and Yilabu, men of immense dignity and immense sadness. They are dressed in robes of heavy silk, their peacock-feathered hats reflecting the light of the setting sun. They look like creatures from a different dimension, fossils of a world that the British are about to dismantle with a few sheets of parchment. The negotiations are conducted in a low murmur. translated back and forth through the medium of Portuguese or Latin, a strange linguistic bridge between two worlds that do not understand each other's hearts. You can hear the scratching of the quills on the paper. Scritch, scritch. It is the sound of China's sovereignty being signed away. The Treaty of Nanjing, the first of the unequal treaties. What does it say? It says that the emperor will pay 21 million silver dollars, a ransom for a nation. It says that 5 treaty ports will be open to British trade, including Shanghai, which is currently little more than a muddy fishing town. It says that the island of Hong Kong will be ceded to the British in perpetuity. And most importantly, though it is not explicitly mentioned in the main text, it ensures that the opium trade will continue, unhindered and unchallenged. The black gold has won. As you watch the commissioners leave the ship, their small boats bobbing in the wake of the great man o' war, the sky turns a deep, bruised purple. The sun is setting on the Qing Dynasty's undisputed rule over its own lands. The historian within you smiles sadly at the wit of the British merchants back in London, who are already celebrating the opening of China as a triumph for Christianity and progress. They do not see the irony of a war fought for a drug, ending in a treaty signed on a warship. You walk to the stern of the Cornwallis and look back down the Yangtze. The river is still there, flowing toward the sea, indifferent to the treaties of men, but the people on its banks have changed. They have seen their iron devil, and they have seen their gods bleed. The mystery of the West has been replaced by the fear of it. The atmosphere is one of exhaustion. The British sailors are eager to head home, or to the new colony of Hong Kong, to spend their prize money and tell tall tales of the Orient. The Chinese are left to pick up the pieces of their shattered pride. You can smell the jasmine again, stronger now that the gunpowder has cleared, but it smells different. It smells like a funeral. The sensory details of the night are sharp. The creak of the ship's timbers as the tide turns, the distant sound of Chinese flute playing a mournful tune from a riverside cottage, the cold light of the stars that seem to have moved further away. You feel the texture of the silk treaty ribbon in your mind, smooth, red, and binding, a ribbon that will tie China to the West for the next 100 years, a knot that will only be cut by the sword of revolution. As we drift into the silence of the night, think of the tea that will soon be flowing toward London in greater quantities than ever before. Every cup will carry a hint of the Yangtze silt, a ghost of the Jinjing walls, and the bitter aftertaste of the poppy. The balance of trade has been restored, but the balance of the world has been permanently upset. The sleepy history of this part ends not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of a ledger. The War of 1839 to 1842 is over, but the wounds are fresh, and the infection is deep. The dragon has been wounded, and the lion is resting, but neither will ever be the same again. Rest your eyes now, as the fleet begins its long journey back toward the sea. The river is long, the night is cool, and the story of the Opium War has reached its first great, tragic plateau. There are more parts to our tale, more consequences to explore, but for now, the ink is wet on the page, and the silence of the Yangtze is the only sound you need to hear. Sleep, and let the yellow water carry you toward the horizon, where the new world is waiting, with its steam and its silver and its endless, restless greed. Part 4. The fragile peace in the shadow of the rock. The ink on the Treaty of Nanjing is barely dry, yet the air over the South China Sea feels transformed, as if a sudden, chilling frost has settled over the tropics. You are standing now on the deck of a small schooner, leaning against the salt spray wood as you navigate the narrow, jagged gap between the mainland and a small, mountainous island that the locals call Fragrant Harbor. Hong Kong. In this year, 1843, it is not the glittering forest of glass and neon that you might imagine from the future. It is a place of wild, raw beauty and profound loneliness. The granite peaks rise sharply from the turquoise water, draped in a scrubby, wind-whipped green. The summits often hidden by low-hanging clouds that look like tattered gray silk. Can you hear the sound of the pickaxes? It is a rhythmic, metallic clinking that echoes off the hillsides. Hundreds of laborers are carving a road out of the rock, the Queen's Road, while the British merchants, the ones you saw pacing the verandas in Canton, are already building their mansions. They are erecting grand, neoclassical structures with white columns and wide porches, trying to recreate a slice of London or Calcutta in this humid, fever-haunted wilderness. The smell of fresh sawdust and wet lime mixes with the salty tang of the sea and the sweet, rutting scent of the tropical jungle. It is the scent of a new beginning, but one built on the foundations of a very old greed. The atmosphere here is one of frantic, nervous energy. The British have their barren rock, as Lord Palmerston dismissively called it, but they are still outsiders looking in. They have opened the 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai, but the gates are not as wide as they had hoped. The Chinese people in these cities do not look at the British with the awe of the defeated. They look at them with a cold, simmering resentment. You walk through the streets of Canton, which are now supposedly open, and you feel the weight of 1,000 eyes following you. The foreign devils are allowed to stay, but they are often confined to certain areas, and the threat of a riot is never more than a misunderstood gesture away. The historian in me notes the subtle, dry humor of the British attempt to civilize their new prize. They establish a police force, a court system, and a post office on an island that barely has enough flat land for a vegetable garden. They bring their cricket bats and their silver tea services, and they dress for dinner in stiff evening wear while the thermometer pushes past 90 degrees and the mosquitoes hum a relentless, bloodthirsty chorus in their ears. It is a theater of the absurd, played out against a backdrop of ancient mountains and an indifferent sea. But beneath the surface of this fragile piece, the bitter seed is flourishing like a weed in the monsoon rain. The Treaty of Nanjing did not legalize opium. It simply ignored it, leaving it in a legal twilight zone that the British are only too happy to exploit. You watch the opium clippers, the greyhounds of the sea, as they slide into Hong Kong harbor. These ships are the pinnacle of naval design, sleek, fast, and heavily armed, designed for one purpose, to outrun the law and the weather. Their sails are brilliant, blinding white against the blue of the bay, but their cargo is as dark as the night. Imagine the hold of one of these clippers. It is cool, dark, and smells overwhelmingly of that earthy, poppy scent you first encountered in the Bengal warehouses. The chests are stacked high, each one representing a small fortune in silver. From Hong Kong, the drug is distributed to smaller luggers and sampans, which carry it up the coast to the 5 treaty ports. The trade is no longer a clandestine affair conducted in moonlit coves. It is an organized, industrial-scale operation that flows through the new channels of free trade. The British merchants argue that since the Chinese officials are still taking bribes to allow the trade, it is the Chinese who are responsible for the immorality of it. It is a convenient logic, a way to sleep soundly in their new white mansions while the social fabric of an empire unravels. You find yourself sitting in a small tea house on the outskirts of Shanghai. This city, once a modest regional port, is expanding at a terrifying rate. You see the Bund, the muddy riverbank where the foreign consulates are being built, looking across the Huangpu River at the crowded, ancient walled city. The contrast is a map of the future. On one side, the Order of the West, telegraphs, steam cranes, and stone embankments. On the other, the teeming, organic chaos of the East. You watch a Chinese merchant, dressed in fine silk but with eyes that look hollow and tired, as he meets with a British clerk. They do not speak, but the clink of silver coins on the wooden table says everything that needs to be said. The melancholy of this period is a quiet one. It is the sound of a culture being hollowed out from the inside. The silver that should be paying for schools, for canals, and for the defense of the borders is instead being melted down to pay for the foreign mud. You see the results in the villages. Men who no longer work the fields, families selling their last possessions for a single pipe, a sense of lethargy and despair that hangs over the land like a persistent fever. The great Qing Empire, which once felt as solid as the Great Wall, is beginning to feel like a house with termites. It looks the same from the outside, but it is becoming fragile, brittle, and dangerously unstable. And what of the emperor? In Beijing, the Daoguang emperor is aging, his spirit broken by the humiliation of the war. He has issued edicts against the drug. He has executed dealers. He has pleaded with his officials, but the silver talks louder than the emperor's commands. He is trapped in a forbidden city that is becoming a prison of his own tradition. You can almost feel the chill in the air of the northern capital, a sense of a mandate being lost. The mandate of heaven is not a permanent gift. It is earned through virtue and order. And as the opium smoke rises, the mandate begins to slip away like steam. Back in Hong Kong, the weather is turning. A typhoon is brewing in the Philippine Sea, and the air has become unnervingly still. The sky is a strange, bruised yellow, and the sea has taken on a leaden, oily quality. You stand on the peak, looking down at the tiny settlement below. It looks so insignificant, a few clusters of buildings clinging to the edge of a vast, angry continent. But you know that this little island is the spear tip of a change that will never be reversed. The sensory details are vivid as the storm approaches, the way the palm fronds begin to clatter against each other like dry bones, the sudden drop in pressure that makes your ears pop, the smell of ozone and rain-drenched earth. The British residents are boarding up their windows, securing their precious tea chests, and huddling in their parlors by candlelight. They are afraid of the wind, but they should be afraid of the history they have unleashed. The wit of the historian finds a dark amusement in the fact that the British, having fought a war to open China, are now complaining about the savagery and duplicity of the Chinese people who don't want their goods. They write long, indignant editorials in the Hong Kong Gazette about the need for more firmness, more gunboats, and more respect. They cannot see that respect is not something you can demand at the end of a cannon. As the first rain begins to fall, huge, heavy drops that shatter against the granite, you realize that the fragile peace of the 1840s is just an intermission. The Treaty of Nanjing solved nothing. It only created new problems. The black gold is still the engine of the economy. The iron devils are still patrolling the coast. And the resentment in the hearts of the Chinese people is only growing deeper. You watch the lights of the opium ships in the harbor as they bob and sway in the rising swell. They are like fireflies in the dark, beautiful and deadly. Inside those ships are the seeds of the next war, and the one after that. The cycle is set, the path is carved, and there is no turning back. We sit here, in the gathering dark of the storm, listening to the thunder roll across the mountains. It sounds like the roar of the British guns at Human, a reminder that the peace is only as strong as the next shipment of silver. The world is waiting, the empire is bleeding, and the bitter seed is finally, truly, beginning to bloom. Rest now, as the wind howls around the cliffs of Hong Kong. The rock is solid beneath you, but the world is shifting. The sleepy historian will stay with you, watching the shadows, as we prepare for the next chapter of this long, tragic, and fascinating tale. The peace is a mask, the silver is a poison, and the storm is just beginning. Part 5. The rising heat and the Taiping shadow. The mid-1840s dissolve into a period of thick, sweltering stagnation, a time where the air over China seems to hold its breath, waiting for a fever to break. You are walking now through the peripheral edges of Canton, away from the grand stone facades of the foreign factories, deep into the labyrinthine streets where the foreign mud has truly taken hold. The sensory landscape here is a harrowing contrast to the sterile ledges of the British merchants. You hear the low, rhythmic coughing of the addicts, a sound like dry autumn leaves skittering over stone. The smell is no longer the sweet jasmine of the riverbanks, but a heavy, sickle-sweet stench of stagnant water and the charred remains of poppy paste. Can you feel the humidity? It is 1847, and the heat in the South China Sea is a physical presence that clings to your skin like a damp, unwanted ghost. The peace established at Nanjing is proving to be a thin, transparent veil. The British are frustrated. They expected the opening of China to lead to a massive market for their Manchester cottons and Birmingham hardware, but the Chinese peasants are not buying. They have no silver left for clothing. They are spending every copper cash they possess on the smoke. And so, the British grow restless, their dry wit turning into a sharp, jagged edge of impatience. They begin to clamor for more concessions, more access, and a complete legalization of the trade that is already quietly destroying the country. But there's a new shadow falling over the land, a shadow that didn't come from the sea, but from the very heart of the Chinese soil. In the southern province of Guangxi, far from the coastal guns of the Royal Navy, a man named Hong Xiuquan has been having visions. He is a failed scholar, a man who crumbled under the weight of the imperial examinations, but in his fever dreams, he has seen a different world. He believes he is the younger brother of Jesus Christ, sent to cleanse China of the demon Manchus and the poison of the foreigners. This is the beginning of the Taiping Rebellion, a movement that will eventually claim 20 million lives. But for now, it is a low-frequency vibration, a distant thunder that the British and the Emperor alike are too distracted to hear. The historian in me watches this with a sense of profound, world-weary melancholy. You see the British officials in Hong Kong, men like Sir John Davis, writing long, arrogant dispatches about Chinese duplicity. They are so focused on the Emperor's failure to adhere to the fine print of the treaty that they cannot see the entire social order of China is beginning to liquefy. You watch a group of British sailors on shore leave, laughing as they toss coins to beggars, oblivious to the fact that those coins will be traded for the very poison their own ships brought into the harbor. It is a circle of tragedy that is as perfect as it is horrific. The pacing of life in the treaty ports has become jagged. There are days of absolute, sun-drenched boredom, where the only movement is the slow rotation of a ceiling fan in a merchant's office, and then there are moments of sudden, explosive violence. A British sailor is insulted in a marketplace. A Chinese shopkeeper is struck by a cane. A stone is thrown, and suddenly, the Iron Devils are back in the harbor, their guns trained on the city, demanding an apology and a payment of silver. The gunboat diplomacy of the late 1840s is a wearying game of brinkmanship. You see the Chinese officials, men who once held the power of life and death, reduced to groveling before young British lieutenants who haven't yet seen their 20th birthdays. Imagine the texture of a letter from this era. The heavy, cream-colored paper of the British Foreign Office, sealed with red wax. Inside, the words are polite, even elegant, but the meaning is brutal. They speak of revising the treaty, of clarifying the rights of merchants, and of the inevitable progress of Western civilization. But if you flip the page, you might find a letter from a Chinese mother, written in a shaky hand to a son who has disappeared into the opium dens of Shanghai. The history of the world is often written in the gap between those two letters. You find yourself standing on the bund in Shanghai as the sun sets, casting long, bloody shadows across the mud. The city is divided now. A French concession here, a British settlement there, an American quarter further up. It is a patchwork of empires, each one building its own walls, its own courts, and its own reality. You watch as the telegraph wires begin to be strung up, black lines cutting across the ancient sky, carrying the prices of tea and opium across the world in an instant. The sleepy history is being replaced by the speed of electricity, and the dragon is being tethered by a web of copper. The sensory details of Shanghai at night are intoxicating and terrifying. The flickering oil lamps of the Chinese city, the bright, steady glow of the gaslights in the British Quarter, the sound of a piano playing a Chopin nocturne in a merchant's parlor, drifting over the wall to mingle with the chanting of a Buddhist funeral procession. It is a world in a state of nervous breakdown, where the old and the new are not blending, but grinding against each other like tectonic plates. In Beijing, the emperor is dying. The Daoguang emperor, who spent his life trying to hold back the tide, is fading with the decade. His successor, the Xianfeng emperor, is young, inexperienced, and surrounded by hardliners who believe that the only way to deal with the British is through force. They do not understand that the British are no longer just a few ships. They are a system, a global, mechanical, and financial system that doesn't care about the virtue of the emperor or the history of the Middle Kingdom. As the 1840s turn into the 1850s, the Taiping shadow grows longer. The rebels are no longer just a few peasants. They are a massive, disciplined army, capturing cities and burning temples. They have banned opium, they have banned foot binding, and they have declared a heavenly kingdom of great peace. The irony, of course, is that their peace is a bloodbath. The British watch from the coast, unsure whether to support the rebels, who are, after all, Christians, or the emperor, who is at least a known quantity. The atmosphere is thick with a sense of the center cannot hold. You walk through a village in the interior, and you see the abandoned shrines. The gods have failed, the emperor has failed, and the silver is gone. The only thing left is the smoke and the hope of a heavenly king who promises a world without the foreign devils. The historians would observe that the British are in a peculiar bind. They want to trade with China, but they are slowly realizing that they have broken the very government they need to enforce that trade. It is like a merchant who burns down the house of his best customer, and then wonders why the orders have stopped coming in. They continue to push, continue to demand, continue to ignore the catastrophe unfolding in the hills. You stand on the deck of a steamer heading back to Hong Kong, watching the coastline of China slip away in the moonlight. It looks peaceful from a distance, a land of mist and mountains, but you know better. You have smelled the smoke, you have heard the cough, and you have seen the iron devil resting in the bay. The bitter seed has not only bloomed, it has poisoned the soil itself. The night is quiet now, save for the thrumming of the engines. The long sentences of the historians stretch out into the dark, mirroring the long, agonizing decades that China is facing. There is no quick fix, no easy peace, only the slow, grinding machinery of history, and the relentless flow of the black gold. Rest your head against the railing, and feel the vibration of the ship. We are moving toward a second war, a second tragedy, and a second shattering of the gate. But for this hour, we are in the between time, the time of the rising heat, the time of the Taiping shadow, and the time of a peace that is nothing more than a slow-motion collapse. The sky is full of stars, the same stars that watched the first Ming emperors, but they look different tonight. They look cold, like the silver that everyone is dying for. Sleep, if the heat will let you, and listen to the water, for the river of history is about to turn into a torrent. Part 6, The Arrow and the Spark of the Second Storm. The mid-1850s arrived not with a whisper, but with the suffocating, electric stillness that precedes a massive tropical storm. You are standing on the busy, chaotic docks of Canton in October 1856, and the air is so thick with humidity it feels as though you are breathing through a wet silk cloth. The fragile peace of the last decade is worn through, frayed by the constant, abrasive friction of two civilizations that refuse to understand one another. The British are no longer content with their 5 ports. They are eyeing the interior of China with the hunger of a lion watching a wounded buffalo, while the Qing officials, besieged by the massive Taiping rebellion in the north, are becoming increasingly desperate and erratic. It is in this atmosphere of heightened nerves and simmering heat that a small, seemingly insignificant vessel becomes the center of the world. The Arrow. Look at her now, a modest lorcha, a hybrid ship with a European hull and Chinese sails, bobbing innocently in the muddy waters of the Pearl River. She is owned by a Chinese merchant, crewed by Chinese sailors, but she is registered in the British colony of Hong Kong. This legal technicality is a shield, a way to navigate the dangerous waters of the coast under the protection of the Union Jack. But the Chinese authorities suspect her of piracy, and on a humid morning, they board her, arresting the crew and, according to the British, hauling down the British flag. Can you hear the outrage? It begins as a low rumble in the British consulate, and quickly rises to a roar that travels all the way to London. The affair of the Arrow is the spark that the British hawks have been waiting for. To the local officials in Canton, It is a simple matter of law and order. To the British Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, it is an intolerable insult to the national honor. The historian in me cannot help but smile a dry, weary smile at the irony. A nation that has built its presence in China on the illegal smuggling of opium is suddenly overcome with a righteous, burning indignation over a minor maritime dispute. The sensory details of this moment are sharp and jagged, the sound of the British cannons returning to the river, the smell of the mud as the tide goes out, and the sight of the young British consul, Harry Parkes, a man of boundless energy and even greater arrogance, demanding an apology that he knows the Chinese cannot give without losing their last shred of dignity. Parkes is a man who believes in the civilizing mission of the gunboat, and he is determined to use this moment to force the gates of Canton wide open. You watch as the British fleet, once again, begins its grim work. This is the start of what history will call the Second Opium War, or the Arrow War. But for the people living in Canton, it is simply a nightmare that refuses to end. The British fire upon the city, their shells arching through the humid sky like falling stars, exploding in the crowded residential quarters. You see the fires reflected in the eyes of the people as they flee across the river in their sampans, carrying whatever they can salvage. The sound of the city burning is a low, persistent crackle, punctuated by the heavy thud of falling masonry. But this time, the British are not alone. Across the world, another power has found a reason to join the fray. The French. They have their own grievances, centered around the execution of a missionary, Father Chapdelaine, in the interior of China. And so, the Anglo-French expedition is born, a coalition of the two most powerful empires on earth, joining forces to humble a dynasty that is already being eaten alive from within by the Taiping rebels. Imagine the sight of the two fleets together, the red of the British and the blue of the French, a colorful, deadly tapestry of imperial ambition anchored off the coast of a dying empire. The pacing of the war is different this time. It is more calculated, more ruthless. The Allies move toward the north, toward the heart of the empire. They realize that Canton is a sideshow. If they want real concessions, they must strike at the throat of the emperor himself. You are now on a ship heading toward the Peiho River, the watery gateway to Beijing. The water here is gray and choppy, a stark contrast to the jade-green bays of the south. You can see the Toku forts guarding the mouth of the river. Low, mud-brick fortifications that look humble but are packed with heavy cannons and thousands of determined defenders. The battle for the Toku forts is a symphony of mud and blood. The British and French troops must advance through waist-deep slime under a blistering sun, while the Chinese defenders rain down iron and fire from above. You can hear the squelch of boots in the mud, the frantic shouting of orders in 3 different languages, and the whistling of the shells. The historian notes with a touch of dry wit that the British officers are still trying to maintain their dignity, even as they are covered in the stinking silt of the riverbank. It is a messy, undignified business, this building of empires. Eventually, the forts fall, and the way to the capital is open. The Allies advance toward Tianjin, and the emperor, the Xianfeng emperor, begins to panic. He is a man who prefers the company of his concubines and the haze of his own opium pipe to the grim realities of statecraft. He sends his negotiators to meet the barbarians, offering treaties and promises, anything to keep them away from the Forbidden City. In 1858, the Treaty of Tianjin is signed, and it is a document of absolute submission. It demands the opening of 10 more ports, the right of foreign legations to reside in Beijing, the right of Christian missionaries to roam the interior, and, finally, explicitly, the legalization of the opium trade. The black gold is no longer a secret. It is now a matter of law. You can see the British merchants in Hong Kong raising their glasses in a toast. The world is their market, and the dragon is their servant. But as you stand in the quiet, dusty streets of Tianjin after the signing, the atmosphere is not one of peace, but of a temporary, hollow truce. The Chinese government has signed the paper, but they have no intention of honoring it. They are playing for time, hoping for a miracle, or perhaps just waiting for the foreigners to go away. The sensory details of the city are haunting. The sound of a distant temple gong, the smell of dust and parched earth, and the sight of the imperial banners fluttering limply in the stagnant air. There's a sense that the true climax of this tragedy is still to come. You find yourself back on the coast as the year 1859 arrives. The British return to ratify the treaty, expecting a smooth entry to the river. Instead, they find the Toku forts have been rebuilt, stronger than ever, and the river is blocked by massive iron chains. The British admiral, arrogant and overconfident, orders an attack, and for once, the Iron Devils are beaten back. The Chinese defenders hold their ground, their cannons finding their marks, and the British fleet is forced to retreat, battered and bloody, with hundreds of casualties. The shock in London is profound. This was not supposed to happen. The barbarians had dared to fight back and win. The response is inevitable and terrifying. A massive new expedition is prepared. An army of 20,000 men, equipped with the latest Armstrong guns and the full might of the Anglo-French alliance. They are not coming back to negotiate. They are coming to punish. As the sun sets over the sea in late 1859, you look toward the horizon. You can see the smoke of the new fleet, a long, dark smudge against the crimson sky. The Second Opium War is about to enter its final, most destructive phase. Their arrow has long since been forgotten, but the fire it lit is now a conflagration that will consume the very heart of China. The melancholy of the historian deepens as we watch the ships approach. We know that ahead of them lies the Summer Palace, the most beautiful place on earth, and we know what the soldiers will do when they reach it. We see the cycle of violence accelerating, the bitter seed producing its most poisonous fruit yet. You lean against the railing. The wood cool now as the night air descends. The water of the Peiho River is dark and silent, carrying the ghosts of the fallen toward the sea. There is no humor left in the story now, only the cold, hard weight of what is about to happen. The dragon is at bay, the lion is enraged, and the gardens of the emperor are about to be trampled into the dust. Rest now, if you can, in the silence before the final storm. The history of the world is about to change forever, and the sleepy historian will be there to guide you through the smoke and the ruins of the world that was. The night is deep, the stars are cold, and the march on Beijing is about to begin. Part 7. The Burning of the Garden of Perfect Brightness. It is the autumn of 1860, and the air in northern China has turned crisp, thin, and brittle, like the ancient parchment of a scholar's scroll. You are walking now along the dusty, rutted road that leads from the coast toward the gates of Beijing. The humidity of the south is a distant memory, replaced by a cold, relentless wind that carries the scent of parched earth and the encroaching winter. Behind you, the Anglo-French army moves like a slow, glittering serpent of steel and scarlet. They have brushed aside the Mongol cavalry at the Battle of Balachiao, the rhythmic clatter-clack of the British Enfield rifles proving more than a match for the bows and spears of the Emperor's elite. Ahead of you, however, lies something that is not a battlefield, but a dream made of stone, water, and silk, the Yuan Mingyuan, the Summer Palace, or as it is known in the West, the Garden of Perfect Brightness. Imagine a landscape that covers nearly 1,000 acres, a sprawling masterpiece of architecture that combines the finest traditions of the East with the surprising, baroque flourishes of the West. There are pagodas that seem to float on lily-padded lakes, marble bridges that arch like frozen rainbows over quiet streams, and palaces filled with the gathered treasures of 5,000 years of civilization, gold-encrusted clocks, ancient jade carvings, delicate porcelains that are thin as a dragonfly's wing, and libraries containing the only copies of lost histories. The historian in me feels a deep, hollow ache as we approach these gates, for we are walking into one of the greatest cultural tragedies in human history. The British and French troops reach the palace first, and for a moment they are stunned into silence by its beauty. But the silence does not last. It is replaced by the sound of glass shattering, of wood splintering, and of the frantic, greedy shouting of men who have found a treasure house without a guard. You see the soldiers, men who were peasants in Brittany or laborious in London only months ago, draping themselves in the Empress's silk robes, filling their pockets with rubies, and using their musket butts to smash open chests of priceless lacquerware just to see what lies inside. The sensory details are sickeningly vivid, the smell of fine sandalwood incense mixing with the sweat of the looters, the sight of a French soldier wearing a necklace of pearls while he hacks a gold thread tapestry from the wall, the sound of a priceless clockwork bird chirping its last mechanical song before being crushed under a muddy boot. This is not just looting. It is a desecration of a civilization's soul. The dry wit of the historian is absent here, replaced by a cold, world-weary observation. The civilizers have become the barbarians, and the barbarians they came to humble are the ones watching their history disappear into the knapsacks of the invaders. But the looting is only the beginning. A darker cloud is gathering. The British High Commissioner, Lord Elgin, the son of the man who took the marbles from the Parthenon, is a man of staying, Victorian morality and a terrifying sense of justice. He is furious that the Chinese authorities have mistreated, and in some cases executed, British prisoners of war and diplomats. He decides that a May fine or another treaty is not enough. He wants to strike a blow that will be felt by the emperor himself, a blow that will haunt the Qing Dynasty for eternity. He decides to burn the summer palace to the ground. You stand on the hills overlooking the gardens on the morning of October 18th, 1860. Can you hear the sound of the torches being lit? Thousands of British soldiers are moved into position, carrying tins of oil and bundles of straw. They move methodically, palace by palace, hole by hole. You watch as the first plumes of smoke rise into the pale blue sky, white at first, then turning into a thick, oily black as the silk hangings and the lacquer would catch fire. The heat begins to radiate across the lakes, making the water shimmer as if it were boiling. The destruction takes 3 full days. The sun is blotted out by a massive, rolling canopy of soot and ash that drifts over the city of Beijing like a funeral shroud. You can see the ash falling on the rooftops of the Forbidden City, a terrifying reminder to the emperor that nothing, not even his most sacred sanctuary, is safe from the foreign devils. The scale of the loss is incomprehensible. Over 200 buildings, thousands of years of art, and the very heart of the Qing aesthetic are reduced to smoldering, blackened ruins. As the fires finally begin to die down, the atmosphere is one of profound, echoing desolation. You walk through the ruins, the ground still hot beneath your feet. The marble bridges are scorched and cracked. The lakes are choked with debris and the half-burned remnants of silk banners. The silence here is no longer the peace of a garden. It is the silence of a hollowed-out skull. You find a single piece of porcelain in the ash, a tiny cup painted with a scene of a peaceful mountain. It is cracked, its beauty ruined, a perfect metaphor for the China that remains. The historian's voice drops to a whisper. This event, the burning of the Yuan Mingyuan, will become the century of humiliation condensed into a single afternoon. It is a wound that will never truly heal, a memory that will be passed down from generation to generation, fueling a resentment that will eventually erupt in revolutions that will change the face of the earth. Lord Elgin believes he has taught the emperor a lesson in civilized behavior. Instead, he has taught the Chinese people that the West is a farce of pure, mechanical destruction. In the wake of the smoke, the Convention of Beijing is signed. It is the final nail in the coffin of the old order. The Treaty of Tianjin is ratified, and more is added. The British take Kowloon, a peninsula opposite Hong Kong Island. The Russians, watching from the north, take a massive slice of territory in the northeast. The opium trade is now fully, legally, and internationally protected. The silver will flow, the tea will ship, and the black gold will continue to numb the pain of a nation that has just seen its most beautiful dream burned to ash. The Xianfeng Emperor never returns to Beijing. He dies in exile at his mountain resort in Chengde, a broken man who presided over the literal incineration of his heritage. Power passes to his 5-year-old son, But the real power begins to gather in the hands of a woman who will dominate the next half-century, the Empress Dowager Cixi. She is a survivor, a woman of iron will who has seen the smoke from the Summer Palace and understands that the only way to deal with the lions is to become a dragon of a different kind. You find yourself standing on the walls of Beijing as the Anglo-French forces finally begin their long march back toward the sea. They are laden with treasure, their pockets full of jade and their ships full of gold. They believe they have won, and in the narrow sense of a ledger, they have. But as you look out over the charred remains of the Yuan Mingyuan, you realize that the cost of this victory is far higher than any amount of silver. The moral authority of the West has been incinerated along with the libraries of the Emperor. The night falls over the capital, cold and indifferent. The sensory details are muted now. The sound of the wind whistling through the ruins, the smell of cold ash, and the pale light of a moon that seems to be morning. You feel the texture of the dust on your skin. It is the dust of 5,000 years of history, scattered to the four winds. The sleepy historian sighs, a long, heavy sound that blends with the wind. This is the climax of our story, the moment where the tragedy reaches its peak. The gates are open, the palace is gone, and the bitter seed has grown into a forest of thorns. We have one part left in our journey, a time to look at the long shadows cast by the fires of Beijing, and to see what became of the survivors in this brave, broken new world. Rest now, if the smell of smoke will let you. The fire is out, but the warmth of the story is still with us. Sleep, and dream of gardens that no longer exist, and a world that was changed forever by a chest of opium and a lit torch. The river of history is wide, and we are nearing the sea. Part 8. The long echo and the waking of the dragon. The smoke from the Summer Palace has long since cleared, carried away by the cold winds of the Gobi Desert. But the air in China remains heavy with the scent of change. You are standing now in the year 1880, nearly 40 years since the first shots were fired in the Pearl River Delta. You are on the Bund in Shanghai, which has transformed from a muddy riverbank into a grand, stone-clad boulevard of international commerce. The gaslights flicker in the evening mist, and the sound of a distant steam whistle from a massive ocean liner echoes off the facades of the banks and trading houses. This is the world the Opium Wars built, a world of global connection, of rapid movement, and of a China that is being remade in the image of its conquerors. But turn your gaze away from the grand buildings and look into the narrow, shadowed alleys of the old city. The bitter seed is no longer an exotic import. It is a domestic reality. To save their silver, the Chinese have begun growing their own poppies on a massive scale, the purple and white flowers blooming in the provinces of Sichuan and Yunnan. Opium has become the social lubricant of an empire in decline, used by everyone from the weary coolie in the docks to the high official in his yamen. It is a quiet, pervasive epidemic, a slow-motion catastrophe that has become part of the very fabric of daily life. The historian in me notes the tragic irony. The British fought to open the market, and in doing so, they created a demand so vast that it eventually outgrew their own supply. Can you feel the weight of the silence in the imperial court? The Empress Dowager Cixi now sits behind the yellow silk curtain, the true power in a land that is desperately trying to self-strengthen. You see the results of this effort as you travel north to the shipyards of Tianjin. There are Chinese-built steamships now, and Chinese soldiers training with German Krupp cannons. They are trying to adopt the Western techniques to repel the Westerners, a paradox that creates a profound tension in the Chinese soul. They are wearing the master's clothes and carrying the master's tools, but their hearts are still rooted in a world of Confucian ritual that the master's tools are designed to destroy. The sensory details of this late-century period are a strange, dissonant mix, the smell of coal smoke from the new railways mingling with the scent of ancient incense, the sound of a telegraph clicking in a provincial capital that still uses water clocks, the sight of a young Chinese student, his queue cut off, wearing a Western suit and reading Darwin in a library that once held the classics of Mencius. The world is tilting, spinning faster and faster, and the old moorings have been cut. The dry wit of the historian returns as we look at the British. They have their treaty ports, their perpetual colony of Hong Kong, and their legalized trade. But they are beginning to realize that they have unleashed a ghost they cannot lay to rest. The China market was never the gold mine they imagined. It was a swamp of debt, rebellion, and resentment. They find themselves constantly drawn into Chinese internal affairs, propping up a crumbling Qing Dynasty because they fear the chaos of its collapse even more than they dislike its arrogance. The Iron Devils are now the policemen of a ruin. You walk through the streets of Hong Kong at the turn of the century. It is a bustling, vertical city now, a triumph of Victorian engineering and Chinese labor. You see the peak tram climbing the steep slopes, and the harbor crowded with ships from every corner of the globe. It is a monument to the success of the British Empire. But as you look across the water at the mainland, you see the flicker of fires in the distance. The Boxer Rebellion is brewing, a violent, desperate outburst of traditionalist rage against the foreign devils and their religion, their railways, and their drugs. The cycle of violence is not over. It is merely entering a more feverish phase. The atmosphere of this final chapter is one of the end of an era. In 1911, the Qing Dynasty, the dynasty of Lin Zexu, of the Daoguang Emperor, and of the Burning Summer Palace, finally collapses, not under the guns of the British, but under the weight of its own obsolescence. The mandate of heaven is gone, replaced by a republic that will struggle for decades to find its footing in a world that the Opium Wars made. The historian's voice grows soft, almost a whisper, for we are seeing the birth of the modern world, and it is a painful, bloody birth. What was the legacy of those 4 hours of history we have traveled together? A cup of tea in London, a chest of silver in Calcutta, a scorched garden in Beijing, and a drug that changed the destiny of a third of the human race. The First and Second Opium Wars were not just about a commodity. They were the first violent collision between the industrial West and the traditional East, a collision that left neither side unchanged. China learned that it could no longer live in a dream of the past. Britain learned that an empire built on the misery of others is a heavy, soul-corroding burden. As you stand on the deck of a ship leaving China for the last time, watching the lights of Shanghai fade into the dark, the sensory details of our journey return to you in a final, swirling mosaic. The smell of the jasmine, the roar of the nemesis, the scratching of the quill at Nanjing, the heat of the fire at the Yuanmingyuan, and the sweet, heavy smoke of the poppy. It is a story of pride, of greed, of misunderstanding, and of the incredible resilience of a people who have outlasted every storm. The melancholy of the historian is tempered now by a sense of perspective. The dragon was not slain. It was merely woken from a long sleep. It was bruised, humiliated, and broken, but it began the long, agonizing process of reinventing itself. The century of humiliation would eventually give way to a century of resurgence, and the lessons learned in the smoke of 1839 would become the foundation of a new kind of power. The night is deep now, the deepest it has been. The water of the Pacific is a dark, endless mirror, reflecting the stars that have watched it all. You feel a sense of profound stillness, the kind that comes at the end of a long, exhausting journey. The story of the Opium War is told. The actors have left the stage, and the ghosts have returned to the mist. Rest now, truly rest. The sleepy narrator is closing the heavy leather lid of the archives. The candles are guttering in their holders, and the ink is dry. We have traveled 4 hours through time, from the quiet ports of the Pearl River to the burning palaces of the North, and we have seen how a single bitter seed can change the world. The world of the 19th century is gone, but its echoes are all around us, in the borders of nations, in the flow of global trade, and in the memories of a people who never forgot the price of a cup of tea. Sleep, and let the silence of the sea be your blanket. The history is finished, the journey is over, and the morning will bring a world that is still, in many ways, dealing with the shadows of the poppy and the iron ship. But for you, there is only the peace of the end. The story has found its harbor. Good night, and let the dragon sleep. For when he wakes, the world will truly tremble.